All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Hey.
You know how we do it here. We get into the nitty-gritty
Absolutely.
of a specific topic, and today it is a big one. Kids' legal rights here in the USA.
Big one for sure.
And, this is something that everyone thinks they kind of have a grasp on. You all grew up here.
Right.
But we're going to be going through this YouTube video that we found from the legal strategist,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called How to Understand Kids' Legal Rights in the USA.
Catchy title.
It is a catchy title, and honestly, it's packed with stuff that surprised me.
Yeah,
And I think it'll surprise a lot of our listeners, too.
absolutely.
We're talking about like the real legal bedrock that protects children from being treated unfairly.
Yeah. And sometimes
Yeah.
things that adults take for granted,
For sure.
that kids really need.
Yeah. So we're going to go through 5 key rights that I think are really important for everyone to do, not just for parents out there, for kids themselves,
For any,
family members, family members, teachers, anyone who interacts with children.
yeah.
So let's jump right into it. The first one is, I think, the most basic one, but the most essential one.
Yeah.
It is the right to safety.
Basic but essential.
And I think, we can all agree that every child deserves to live in a safe environment,
Of course.
free from abuse and neglect. But this goes beyond good intentions.
For sure.
Like, this is codified in law.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think what's interesting, too, is that it's not just parents' obligation to provide that safety for their kids. Like,
Right.
there's this whole system of mandatory reporters and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and this is what I was surprised about because, you always hear about parents,
Right.
not doing right by their kids, but there are legal ramifications
Oh, for sure.
for people who violate this.
Right. Yeah.
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 So we're not talking about just like,
It's not just a moral obligation, it's a legal one.
it's a legal one.
Mhm.
There are laws against child abuse and neglect, and they are meant to protect children.
Yep. And importantly, I think these laws empower children
Yeah.
as well
Yes. And this is
to report abuse if they can.
Yes, this is such a good point because, you think of a child and they are at the mercy of their, parents or guardians, whoever.
Yeah.
But legally, like, a child doesn't have to stay silent in a dangerous situation.
Exactly.
They can call 911.
Absolutely.
They can call Child Protective Services.
Yep.
Or, like you said, it's not even just on them to do that.
Right.
We have those mandatory reporters.
Yeah. Teachers, doctors, social worker.
These people who work with children who are legally obligated to report.
Right. And sometimes that's a tough call,
Interesting.
to make that judgment call. But it's there to protect kids.
But yeah.
It's a safety net.
It's a safety net. And the idea is that because a child, isn't always able to advocate for themselves,
Right.
we have entrusted other people
Other people.
to do it.
Yeah. It takes a village, as
Yeah.
they say.
Yeah. It does. It really does. All right. So the next one we're going to talk about is the right to education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is one we hear all the time, right? Education is the key.
Right.
But it's more than just a saying here.
Absolutely.
In the USA, it is a fundamental right
Yeah.
guaranteed to every child,
Yeah.
regardless of gender disability or even immigration status.
Yeah. And it's free.
Free
Public education
public education
till the age of 18.
until the age of 18.
Huge.
It's a cornerstone
Cornerstone of our society.
of our society.
Yeah.
And what's interesting here is like, you think about it, you're like, okay, so they can go to school,
Yeah.
but this right isn't just about access.
Right.
It covers the environment in which that education takes place.
Totally.
So we're talking about a safe
Free-
learning environment,
Safe.
free from bullying,
Free from discrimination.
discrimination, all this stuff.
Yeah.
And, that's just as important.
It is absolutely as the access itself.
So speaking of creating a space for expression, we talked about a safe learning environment.
Right.
The next one is the right to free speech.
Okay.
And this one always sparks debate,
Especially when it comes to schools, right?
especially in schools. Yeah, because
But in schools,
Yeah.
like how far does that go?
how far does that go? And a lot of people don't realize that kids have First Amendment rights,
They do.
just like adults do.
Just like adults. That's right.
So this means they can express their opinions.
Yep.
They can participate in peaceful protests,
As long as it's peaceful.
as long as it's peaceful.
Right.
And even wear clothing that reflects like their individuality.
Self-expression.
Yeah, as long as it's within,
Within reason.
right, the boundaries.
School regulations for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the courts have had to like figure out where the line is
Yes.
between free speech
Yes.
and keeping order
This is where it gets so tricky.
because they're kids.
Because they're kids,
that.
yeah. So it's like, you've got to keep them safe. You've got to keep some sort of order.
Right.
But also, like, honor their right to free speech.
And they're developing brains,
Exactly.
you know?
Yeah. It's not easy.
It's not easy at all. And of course, there are certain types of speech that are not protected.
Even for adults.
Even for adults.
Like hate speech, threats of violence.
Right. Things that,
Cross the line.
yeah, endanger other people.
Right.
So that is not protected speech.
No.
Even for children.
Not at all.
Okay, so the next one is a little more personal. It is the right to privacy.
Okay.
And this one gets really complex.
Especially in our digital age.
Especially now, yeah.
Where everything's recorded
Oh, my gosh.
and tracked.
And people may not realize that this Fourth Amendment protection
Right.
against unreasonable searches
Yep.
applies to students,
It
too.
applies to students. That's right.
So schools can't just search a student's belongings.
Yep.
Including their phone.
Especially their phone these days.
Especially their phone now.
Right.
Without a valid reason.
They need what's called reasonable suspicion.
Reasonable suspicion.
Right. And there's actually been...
And this is where it gets tricky.
It is tricky.
Because what is reasonable suspicion?
Well, the courts have kind of defined it a little bit.
Okay.
But it varies from case to case. But the idea is you
Right.
can't just go searching willy-nilly.
Right. You need to have some kind of
Right.
evidence.
Some reason to think that they're doing something wrong.
Right.
Or that they have something that they shouldn't have.
Exactly. And so this right to privacy,
Yeah.
like we said, it extends beyond school.
Right.
In some states, minors actually have the right to access certain medical care.
Like birth control.
Like birth control.
Without parental consent.
Without parental consent. So
This is huge.
it's huge.
Yeah.
And so it's this, delicate balancing act.
Yeah. Protecting children.
Protecting children
But also recognizing
and their autonomy.
their growing autonomy.
Yeah. Like they're not, completely helpless.
Right.
And so it's, it's something that we have to constantly think about.
And laws are always changing too.
Yeah, always changing. Yeah.
So what might be the case in one state
Right.
might not be the case in another.
Exactly.
So you always have to be up to date on what the laws are.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so last but not least, we're going to talk about the right to legal representation.
Okay.
And this one is so crucial because if we're talking about kids interacting with the legal system,
Right.
this is so important.
That's a big one.
Because we need to ensure that they're treated fairly
Absolutely.
and that they have due process.
Yeah.
So if a child is accused of a crime,
Which can happen.
which can happen,
They're not perfect.
they're not perfect.
No. They make mistakes.
They make mistakes.
Sometimes those mistakes are crimes.
Right. And so they have the right to an attorney,
Just like adults do.
just like adults do.
Yep.
And it's so important.
It is... Imagine like a kid trying to navigate the legal system on their own.
I can't even imagine.
It's scary.
It's terrifying.
It's scary for adults.
Yeah.
Never mind kids.
And so this is to help level the playing field and ensure that their rights are protected.
Exactly.
And it's important to note that juvenile courts handle cases involving minors differently
Very differently.
than adult courts.
Much more focused on rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation
Than
and
punishment.
Yes, helping the child
Right.
rather than just punishing them.
Right, because they're still developing.
Exactly.
Their brains are still developing.
Yeah, exactly.
So the idea is that,
You can
so
say
teach them.
teach them,
You
right?
can still guide them
And guide them.
on the right path.
And this is huge, right?
Yeah, it's a recognition that kids are different
Yes.
from adults.
And it's so important.
It's very important.
And, it's also worth mentioning that children have the right to testify in court
That's right.
and have their voices heard
Yes.
in things like custody cases.
Because sometimes they're the only ones who really know
Right.
what's going on.
What's going on, and their perspective is crucial
Absolutely.
in those
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah.
So that's it. Those are the 5 key rights that we talked about today.
Big ones.
The right to safety, the right to education, the right to free speech, the right to privacy, and the right to legal representation.
Huge right.
These are huge rights.
Yeah.
And they form this crucial framework
Absolutely.
for protecting children and making sure that they're treated fairly.
Yeah. And it's not a perfect system,
It's not.
but it's evolving.
It's evolving. And that's kind of what I wanted to leave everyone with today.
Okay.
We've gone over these rights.
Right.
But it's only the first step. Like
Mhm.
knowing these rights is one thing. But how do we as individuals, as a society, how do we better advocate
Yeah.
for children?
How do we make sure,
Those rights
like,
are actually protected.
yes, that their voices are truly heard? Yeah. Because sometimes just because you have a right
Right.
doesn't mean you can exercise it.
Doesn't mean it happens.
Right. Right. You need help.
And so That's where we all come in.
Can we all have a role to play?
We all have a role to play.
Sure.
So that's something I want everyone to think about today.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for listening to another Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
We will see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.